Not victory, not regret. Just a temporary void, like after a storm. I turned back to look at the remains of the window. In the remaining dust, I saw my own reflection. No horns. No deformity. Just me. But in my eyes, there was still a strange light. As if part of it stayed. I left the building with a wobbly step, as if the gravity of this world had been adjusted in a way I no longer noticed. The Boston air still smelled familiarly of exhaust and burnt toast from early morning coffee shops, but something about the rhythm of the city now felt out of sync with me. Claire, or someone who looked like Claire, wasn't herself anymore. Or maybe she never was. I sat in the car, sinking into the driver's seat, still clutching my phone, flipping through our contact list, old photos of the two of us. There was something about her smile in the photo that slipped my memory, as if it had been edited by some software, pixels right, but meaning wrong. I tried dialing her mother's number, only to hear an old woman I didn't recognize answer in a polite voice. "I think you have the wrong number." Not the wrong number, I've had it saved all the way back to 2023. But every trace of Claire Mitchell, the Claire I loved, the Claire I knew, the Claire I held through my midnight panic attacks, seemed to be disappearing. Not gone, but completely restructured. And like a stained glass window, like a face in amber, I began to recognize a familiar pattern. Claire did not leave my side. Claire was replaced. I walked back to my Beacon Hill apartment, the sky ashen, the wind whispering in a dark alley. There was a sharp emptiness inside me. Not loss, but intrusion. The sense that not just Claire, but my memory of her, was being rewritten. There was still one of her Polaroids on her desk, the two of us grinning in the bathroom mirror, shaving foam on her nose. I looked closely. No more scars. There was no longer the bright eyes of the Claire I knew. The girl in the picture looked at me with a blank expression like a mirror. That night, I dreamed of the chapel. Not the chapel as it is now, but the version before the stained glass, the ceiling bare, the walls cold stone, and in the center a deep, circular pit, like an unhealed wound. Around the pit, dozens of people in robes, all with their backs to me. In their hands were shards of glass, glittering, but also sharp like the edge of forgotten truth. One person turned back. No face. No name. But I know it's Claire. She held up a piece of glass toward me, and the reflection in it wasn't me, it was who I was about to become. I woke up in the night, chest pounding, cold sweat pouring, and in the bedroom mirror, the one I'd avoided looking at for so long, I saw the faint horn beginning to form above my temple. At the same time, the stick in my hand was hot and trembled in short bursts. The ground beneath my feet seemed to shake slightly. And from the glass, a voice rang out, not through my ears, but out directly in my head. "We have waited a long time. It is time to choose." I couldn't breathe. All the blood in my body seemed to freeze, every cell tensed. What to choose? I'm not sure if I asked aloud or just thought it, but the voice replied. Keep or open? The question was too vague. Keep what? Open what? But the deepest part of me, the part one had not touched for so long, understood. If I choose to hold, I will stifle something that is rising. Lock it away, like my father did. And maybe live the rest of my life in a false sense of security. If I choose open. I reached out and touched the glass. Just one touch. And the world burst. Sometimes stained glass for churches, sometimes antique optical instruments. Some were mirror makers, others worked in microscopes or prism making. Either way, they all live around reflective surfaces. And most have one creepy thing in common: they disappear from public records at some point in time, as if they were, withdraw from the world. I sat motionless for hours, my eyes glued to the screen. The genealogical pages, the forgotten local newspaper articles, the cryptic obituaries, all seemed to tell a vague but undeniable story. None of these men had lived ordinary lives. All had reached a breaking point, a select, as my father said. When I finally left my desk, the clock was just past midnight. I turned off the light, but as I walked toward the bed, I stopped, suddenly and coldly. In the mirror at the end of the hallway, my reflection, with horns clearer than ever. I turned my head to look back. Behind me was completely empty. Nothing. I looked back in the mirror. The horns are still there. No movement. No vibration. Just present. The next morning I returned to the chapel. I no longer felt like a restoration expert. I was a successor of something I didn't understand, but now couldn't deny. Mrs. Hadley was waiting for me outside, clutching an old, cracked leather notebook. She said nothing, just handed it to me, as if she had finally realized there was no point in delaying. "Your grandfather's," she whispered. "His work diary, and a few other things." I sat down on the wooden bench in the middle of the altar and opened the book. The first pages were window diagrams, technical notes, glass compositions, lead thicknesses. Then came the shaky handwriting, a voice that grew increasingly confused, out of control. "They are not just in the glass. Sound is the key, resonance, but not just any sound. They understand liturgical music. They move through repertoires, avoiding certain hymns, converging on praise songs that have a particular vibrancy. The clearer the face, the more I see myself reflected in it. I fear that one day, it will be me." I closed the book. The wind suddenly changed direction, whining through the cracks of the windows. The amber glass panels reflected the morning light vividly. Unnatural. Everything started shaking, right note. I stood up and walked to the altar. The bronze cross had begun to tarnish where it had been exposed to the reflected light. A strange form of oxidation? Or contact? I know what I need to do. No more restoration. But adjust. I returned to the desk at the back of the chapel and opened the old audio console that had been abandoned since the 80s. Plugging in the headphones, I began testing the frequencies. At 63 Hz, the glasses began to hum. At 97 Hz, the face blurred. At 143 Hz, it smiled. I sat motionless, my hand still on the joystick. My back was cold. Face in the glass reply. And I know. Whether I adjust, whether I remove, whether I change the frequency or the entire glass panel, it chose me. And there is no turning back. I clenched my grip on the stylus. Sweat soaked through the fabric of my gloves, salty and heavy as the decision weighing on my shoulders. Select now. The phrase continued to repeat itself wordlessly in the mouth of the entity behind the glass. Without sound, it echoed more clearly in my head than any choir ever sang. Mrs. Hadley stood beside me, saying nothing more. But her eyes were not pleading, not warning, simply wait. As if she were just another link in a long chain of people keeping this deal. I glanced at Reverend Williams. He was nodding along to the music, his expression almost blindingly earnest. His glasses, now reflecting my face, the long, root-like horns extending from his temples, looked as if they had been drawn in black ink on water. They accepted it. All of them. And I haven't. I walked toward the stained glass window. The face in it now had my shape, not a copy, but optimized version, sharper, more powerful, confident as a king looking back at the timid person he used to be. And it smiled. That smile wasn't exactly evil. I'd invite. Stidle's tongue touched the lead of the glass edges, the edge that I knew needed just the right jerk to send the whole structure broken. The chorus came to a close, a long, dense chord-like mist, making every molecule of air vibrate. Space seemed to stretch in that moment. I whispered a Bible verse I never knew. Let no other light shine through you but the light of him who created light. And then, I brought down the stydle. The shattering sound wasn't as loud as I expected. There was no thunderous boom, no flash of light. Just a dry crack, and then silence. The final chorus of the chorus broke. A female voice choked. Several people collapsed. The glass shattered into hundreds of pieces, but they did not fall. They hung suspended, as if held by a reluctance to leave the old form. Then slowly, each piece began to burn. Not fire, but a black light form, as antimatter is devouring all reflections. A scream rang out. I couldn't tell where it came from. Maybe it was the entity. Maybe it was Mrs. Hadley. Maybe it was inside me. Then it all fell apart. When I woke up, the chapel was bathed in the dim afternoon light. No stained glass. No shadow of the horn. Just a gap where the window had been. Mrs. Hadley was gone. Reverend William sat motionless in his chair, his eyes wide open as if he had never blinked. The choir scattered, as if a part of their memory had been erased. I stood up, my legs heavy as rocks, but something else in my chest. Quiet. Just like my father before. And maybe Toho Ancestris before that. It was still dark when I arrived at the chapel. The sun was just cutting a thin orange line across the horizon, bathing the sleepy town in the gray light of dawn. The chapel door was wide open. Mrs. Hadley stood in the hall, not waiting for me to speak, but simply motioning with her hand, a hasty and slightly shaky gesture. I stepped inside, and the air in the chapel felt thick, filled with a cool mist despite the still hot weather outside. The smell of old wood, damp plaster, and something else, metal, blood, lurked in the air. And then I looked up. The stained glass window was no longer what it had been yesterday. Not broken, not stained, not showing any signs of damage. But distinctive. Each piece of glass now looked as if it had been hand-polished by an artisan I could never have imagined. The pencil lines were now so smooth and delicate they almost disappeared, leaving behind a terrifyingly vivid picture. The face in the upper right corner, the face that had once been a blemish or an illusion, now appeared clearly, as if it were a Belling original design. Not just present, it has taken center stage. The figure that was once an angel holding a lyre is now just a faint shadow behind that face. I moved closer. The portrait in the glass did not move, but Ithave will. On purpose. The window, no one touched it, Mrs. Hadley whispered beside me. No choir boy, no carpenter, no cleaner. I check it every night. You kept a good record of the damage, there's no sign of it now. I reached out and touched the glass lightly. It was cool, like water from a deep well. And as my finger left, a circle of steam quietly formed, gray and dense, as if the window let out a long breath, and responded. Sunday service took place in the bright morning light. The chapel was packed. The choir stood in front, dressed in white vestments, and I hid behind the wings, not wanting to be recognized. Pastor Williams began with a few familiar words. His voice was steady, inspired. But there was something in his eyes, as if heck know what awaits behind this ceremony. And then the music started. How great thou art. I used to think I knew this hymn. It was the lullaby of childhood Sunday mornings, echoing through the years. But today, it not like that. Not because of the way of singing, but because how stained glass reacts. Sunlight streamed through the windows, bending into 1,000 shimmering shards of color across the chapel. But this time, the light seemed to be sucked in, not radiating but retreating back to that portrait. And then, the glasses began to sing again. I can't describe it any other way. A sound rang out, blending into the choir's melody, but coming from no instrument or person. It echoed off the brick walls, off the oak, off the stained glass. And that sound carried with it an image, celebrate, but not my own. Strange scenes flashed before my eyes like negatives. Silver-haired men bowed before this window, blood soaking their sleeves, children whispering to the darkness under the altar, and my father, younger than I ever remembered, standing in this very spot, his hand touching the glass, tears streaming down his cheeks. The song ended. But no one clapped. No one moved. The whole chapel was mesmerized. A long moment passed in absolute silence. Then Reverend Williams, in a voice almost choked, said, "We have just witnessed something unnameable. But know that this window has come to life, and the presence within it is not something we can ignore any longer." I stepped back as the congregation began to discuss excitedly, their faces a mixture of confusion and fear. I knew one thing for sure: the window had awakened. And it chose me. But then something happened, a subtle change, almost imperceptible unless I was in a state of absolute alertness. The light coming through the window, which had long been just material for observation, began torply eye. It is not simply refraction or reflection, but the interact. Every time I got closer to that face, the surrounding glass seemed to vibrate slightly, not making a sound, but as if emitting emotional response. I placed my palm on a piece of glass below, the only one that didn't change color with the light, and a tingling sensation ran down my arm like a gentle electric current. The window was no longer just an object. It was a living entity, and it istre me. I remembered Mrs. Hadley's words: "Some families are marked out for specific purposes." A dim memory rose, of a summer night many years ago when I had slipped out of bed and found my father standing in the darkness of the chapel, alone with his old wooden cane in his hand. I remembered the light from the window shining directly into his eyes, and the way he had muttered something I couldn't quite make out. When he turned and saw me, his face relaxed, not in surprise, but realize. Now, I understand. A window does more than just record images of the outside world. It records bloodline. It watches. It tests each generation, and eventually, chooses one. There was a slight creaking sound from the door behind the shrine. I turned around, startled, my heart beating faster than usual. There was no one. But I clearly felt someone. Something crossed that threshold. A cold gust of air brushed the back of my neck, and then all was silent. I walked slowly toward the half-closed door. My hand gently pushed it open. A spiral wooden staircase appeared, leading down to a basement I had never noticed, or maybe it had never once I noticed. At the foot of the stairs, the darkness was as thick as a black velvet curtain. But amidst the darkness, I could sense a very faint light, amber, flashing invitingly. Without thinking further, I took my stick and walked down the steps one by one. Each footstep made a different sound, not in a regular rhythm. It seemed like stairs playing music. The low notes, the vague vibrato, the harmonies, as if someone were silently humming the hymn I had heard in my dream. When I got there, I found myself standing in a small room, the stone wall exposed rough. In the middle of the room was a large glass block, cleverly attached to an old hexagonal iron frame. And right there, an amber face. First time really looked at me. It's not a reflection. It's not vapor. It is there. I reached the main highway, my heart pounding. I swerved into traffic like a man being chased from hell, and when I took one last look in the rearview mirror, the black sedan was gone. Not a trace. But then, the moment I started to breathe lightly, the phone vibrated. A message. No number. No sender. Just one line. "You should have stayed." I set the toolbox down on the first bench and covered the damaged glass with a plastic sheet. Mrs. Hadley nodded, then turned away without another word, her footsteps echoing softly against the high, old walls. When the door to the hallway closed behind her, a thick silence fell. Not the natural kind, but the kind that felt like listening. I lifted the small mirror, turned it slightly toward the panes above, where I had seen that face. The same opaque swirls of amber glass, the lead lines forming a strange but indistinct pattern. I tilted the mirror. It reflected the sunlight slanting through the window, and for a moment, my heart sank. I saw it again. Not clear. Not all of it. but enough to recognize. That same face. That same look. Not fierce, not gentle. Just, knowing. A cold, silent, unmoving awareness. And as if for the first time, those eyes locked on me again, as if waiting for me to realize something I had never had the courage to admit. I blinked. The mirror slipped from my hand and fell to the floor, shattering into 3 pieces. The sound made my heart pound. I bent down to pick them up, my hands shaking, and realized that in one of the pieces, the largest, the face was still there. No reflection from stained glass. No bending of light. Just, there. No movement. No change. Just wait. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I told myself, it was stress. It was childhood memories. It was the pressure of work. But when I opened my eyes, the mirror was gone. Just the old wooden floor and a thin layer of dust. And then, suddenly, the sound office echoed from above. I looked up. One of the lead bars in the upper part of the window is cracked. Slowly. Very slowly. As if some force from behind the glass was pressing in, trying to break through, pushing the protective layer away from the surface. There was no wind. There was no impact. But the crack continued to widen like a cut spreading across the flesh. I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest, then 2 more. My feet hit the wooden bench, knocking the tool bag off my shoulders. From there, a glass pick rolled out, hitting the floor and stopping, inches from the edge of the colored light the window created. I dare not step into that light again. Because there is something, waiting inside it. Not just a face. Not just an illusion of light and glass. But an entity, trapped between layers of glass, layers of memory, and layers of time. Something that had been sealed there, not to be displayed, but to be imprisoned. And every crack, every piece of lead that cracks, is a sign of disassembly. Mrs. Hadley knew. My father knew. And now I know, I didn't come here to fix a window. I was called back to testify for a liberation. I nodded, reluctantly agreeing. Nothing was wrong, on the surface. All the procedures were correct. But every feeling inside me was screaming that, not okay. When Mrs. Hadley left, I continued working, trying to concentrate on the details, taking measurements, redrawing the structure, taking careful notes. But part of me kept gravitating toward that upper right corner. Every time the light shifted, I felt something change. Not the glass. Not the shadow. But awareness. It was as if a pair of eyes were opening from the other side, looking back at me. Late in the afternoon, when the light had softened, I got off the scaffolding and wiped the sweat and dirt from my hands. The stickiness on my fingertips made me look closely. Glass dust was usually dry, a little rough. But what clung to my hands seemed wet. A dark, gray slime, as if condensation from the glass was melting into my skin. I washed it off in the old sink behind the chapel, scrubbing until my skin was red. In the mirror, the yellow light from the fluorescence made my face look different. Grayer. Eyes deeper. And forehead, those dimples seemed still there, just dims when I'm not looking directly. I decided to leave early. It was getting dark, and I didn't want to stay past sunset. There was something in the shadows here, in the air, in the brick walls, and especially in the glass, that was wake up. That night, at the small hotel in the suburbs, I couldn't sleep. Fatigue came over me, but every time I closed my eyes, I found myself standing in front of that stained glass window. Not like in the daytime. But in a dream or something almost real more than a dream. The window glowed from within, emitting a light that was not that of the sun or electric light, but the light of something older, darker, in progress get back before mine. In my dream, I was the 13-year-old boy sitting in the front row, his neck tilted back, his eyes following the hymns as the morning light filtered through the glass. The choir sang the song How Great Thou Art. But this time, the song did not come from a human mouth, but from the glass itself. The notes vibrated from the lead, from the glass, from the formless voice. And that face, no longer locked up. The next morning, I returned to the chapel before 6 o'clock. I needed to know. I needed confirmation that everything I felt yesterday was just fatigue, an echo from the past. But when I opened the door, mist was already filling the inside of the chapel. Not the usual morning mist, but thick, like smoke, like the breath of something living inside the bricks and stones. And it is waiting for me. I stepped inside. Mist curled around my ankles, thickening with each step. The space by the window seemed to glow softly. I raised my head, and the face was no longer there. It was revealed. Obviously. Deep eyes stared straight at me. Not God, not the devil. Something else stood between. An entity has been waiting exactly 1% to awaken. I sat down on the floor, unable to breathe. In the corner of the room, the video system automatically played back new video, a slow, blurry shot from the Bay 7 camera, showing I was standing in front of that creature, raised his hand, as if, welcome it. I never did that. I never raised my hand. The screen suddenly went black. The text appears, white on black. First stage, successful connection establishment. Prototype 04 is in the process of synchronization. I am a prototype. I started shaking. It was like a memory, but not quite mine. It felt like someone who had lived and breathed and died in this chapel was borrowing my senses to experience it again. I walked slowly between the pews, the cracked oak, quietly as if afraid to disturb something sleeping. But not all sleep is gentle. My hand slid lightly across the arm of the chair, and each touch seemed to stir up a fragment of memory, a faint female voice singing, the sound of maple trees scraping against the glass, and finally a screech, as if something dry were being dragged across the stone floor. I don't want to remember, but the chapel wants me to remember. I stopped before the pulpit. The red cloth was faded and hung awkwardly, as if someone had once clung to it. On the pulpit, the Bible was still there. But not where I remembered it. It was not in the middle of the pulpit as it had been. It was off to the right, open to a blank page. The yellowed paper was blank, except for a single line of shaky handwriting at the bottom border. We don't leave. We sink. I paused. The words were like an echo from a nightmare I couldn't name. I turned back. At the back of the chapel, a small hatch under the choir was ajar. There. I had never known there was a cellar. In all the years I had lived here, the ceremonies, the choir practices, no one had ever mentioned a cellar. But sure enough, the dark wooden door, revealing a deep, dark crevice, was waiting. Cold wind blew up from below, carrying the smell of damp earth and something, pungent, like rust. I don't know why I kept walking. Maybe it was because I couldn't control my legs anymore. Or because some part of me had always known, this place had never been just a chapel. Down the first 3 steps, the light above disappeared. I took out my flashlight, but it was only a weak light, as if it did not want to illuminate the place. The unplastered brick wall, soaked with water and green mold, showed scribbled symbols, not graffiti, but something older. Interlocking circles, diagonal lines, and signs that were almost the ancestors of language. On the 13th step, I heard singing. A child's voice, weak and distorted, was singing the old hymn. Nearer, my God, to thee. But the rhythm is completely wrong. The song drags on, slow and suffocating. I froze in place. Then I heard something crawling. Not steps. Hand cow sound. I turned the flashlight toward the sound. The left wall was no longer a wall. It was breathing. The bricks curved gently in rhythm, like a chest. And in the middle of that wall, a face appeared, not jutting out, not separate, but as if the human face had melted into the bricks, but was still alive. His eyes opened. His lips moved. "Don't let him use the car anymore. Don't let him drive south," I screamed, stepping back. But from behind, a cold hand touched my neck. "Nobody. No. Not no one. Just they do not stand alone. They are part of the chapel, parts of the walls, stairs, ceilings, are held together not by mortar, but by memory and blood." I ran. Fell. Slipped over rusted signs. Gasped for breath until the basement door slammed shut behind me. I didn't look back. I rushed out of the chapel, got into the truck, and started it without checking. The headlights came on, but for the first time I noticed, the road ahead is not the one I came to. It was a bumpy dirt road, lined with old trees, a road I had never seen on a map. The engine roared, but not to my liking. My hands were not on the wheel. I am leaving Bethel Baptist. But I know, it is not me leaving. It is continuing the journey. I inched backwards, eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. The car was still there, headlights aimed straight at me, not moving, not a sound from inside. It felt like I was being watched by something invisible lurking behind the black glass. I rolled down my window. The night air was cold, but I needed to hear any sounds outside, any engine, any footsteps, any sign of who was driving the other car. But there was silence. Absolute silence. "Okay, I can't stand here forever," I told myself. Gripping the wheel, I turned on my headlights again, shining them straight ahead. The moment the light touched the black sedan, I froze. There were now handprints on its windshield. Not one, but dozens of them, as if someone had tried to escape from inside. They were blurry, wet, sliding across the glass. I held my breath. The other car door slowly opened. No one got out. I almost cried from the mental pressure. But then, there was a small movement. Very slight. A figure, no, not quite a person, shorter than normal, thin and indistinct, was slipping out of the car like a shadow leaking through a crack in the door. Without waiting another second, I jerked the gearshift, put the car in reverse, and turned around. I didn't care if it was irresponsible to run away. I just knew I needed to get away, as far away as possible. The more I ran, the more I could see the headlights following me. It wasn't in a hurry. It wasn't revving. But it didn't stop. It kept enough distance so I knew I was being pursued. Part of me screamed that this wasn't real, a delusion from lack of sleep, but every sense screamed a warning: don't turn around. Don't stop. And never look straight in the rearview mirror again. My phone rang. Not a call. But a new request from the app, a pickup point at the exact location I had just left. User, K, confirmed. Reserved. I had never seen such a strange request. The app didn't allow bookings at that hour. I was about to decline when my hand felt like it was being grabbed, my finger tapping, accept, without thinking. Immediately, the navigation turned, the light from the screen flickered like a ventilator, and a whisper came from the speaker: "Thanks for coming back." I jumped, my heart pounding. No one was in the car. I didn't have my virtual assistant on. But the voice was clearly not mine, not from any recording I knew. I looked out. It was still raining. The road had changed shape. There were no familiar signs, no traffic lights. Just tall, black trees, and a figure standing under an umbrella, right at the pickup point. No face. Just a black, still shadow. I slammed on the brakes. The car stopped in front of him. But as I went to roll down the window, he opened the door and got into the back seat, smoothly, silently, as if he had been there all along. I couldn't turn around. My neck felt frozen. My eyes were glued to the road ahead, even though every instinct told me to run. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice breaking. The person didn't answer. But my phone suddenly displayed a new destination, Belmont Grand Hotel. I had never heard of that name. But the map showed the way. The car started automatically, as if someone else was at the controls. My hands, though trembling, gripped the wheel. As the car started to move, I sensed something was wrong, as if there were more than one person in the back. There was no sound. No breathing. But the space behind the car felt dense, as if it were occupied by invisible things, piled on top of each other, congealing into an eerie silence. In the rearview mirror, I still could see nothing but blackness. But this time, there were eyes. Not one. Many eyes. As if I was carrying a buried memory back. And I know, I can't stop halfway. Not because I don't want to. But because they're not allowed. I pushed open the control room door and stepped cautiously inside. The air was cold, dry, and filled with the smell of burned machinery. Inside, the main control panel was dimly lit, and I could tell immediately that something had tampered with the system. The sensor screens had changed color, from their normal thermal mode to a distorted, almost, biological display. The images were no longer of objects like animals, people, or machines, but of pulsating shapes, like muscles, like a beating heart, like a nervous system being exposed. I pulled out my phone to take a picture, but it suddenly went dead. As I bent down to check, I heard a clicking sound, very soft, but definite, like fingernails scraping against a metal table. I turned around, and there was no one in the room. But the control panel was now automatically displaying a new recording, 02:13 AM, Bay 7. I swallowed, trying to keep my hands from shaking. Bay 7. It was where I'd seen the heat anomaly last night, and where I'd reset all my surveillance equipment this morning. I didn't want to go back there, not at all, but something inside me, curiosity, or something deeper, had to keep me going. I left the control room, grabbed my high-powered flashlight, and headed straight down the hallway, past the temporarily closed operations area. The wind from the bay was picking up, though the sky was still cloudless. The metal doors squeaked as I pushed them open, and when I reached the door to Bay 7, I stopped. There was no sound. Nothing unusual. But somehow, I felt like I was being watched, not from behind, but from within. I turned on the light and walked in. Bay 7's hangar was large and empty, but not as it had been last night. The scratches on the floor had spread like spiderwebs. New scratches, deeper and longer, appeared on the steel walls, as if something were trying to break through from within. I shone my light along the shelves, where containers of supplies and broken equipment were stored, but then the light stopped. A person is standing at the end of the compartment. No, not one person. It was humanoid, almost 2 meters tall, but its body had no clear boundaries. Everything seemed to be molded from a silvery gray slime, always moving as gently as breathing. There were no eyes, no mouth, but I felt it was looking. Not blinking. Not moving. And then, the echo came, not from its mouth, but from in my head. You opened the door. I couldn't move. My heart was pounding like it was going to explode. The metallic sound came again, this time not from it, but from the compartment door was closing automatically behind me. I lunged for it, but it was too late. The emergency lights turned red. The safety lock was activated. I was trapped. And the creature started moving closer. Step by step, slowly, as if defying gravity. No sound. The air around me felt heavy, as if all the oxygen had been sucked out. I backed away, my back hitting a shelf of equipment. You saw something you shouldn't have. I shouted, "Who are you? What the hell is going on here?" It froze, then a part of its body, like an arm, stretched out, reaching towards me. I grabbed the crowbar from the shelf and hit it hard. There was a deafening sound of metal hitting its body, but there was no blood, no wound. Just a slight jolt, and then its body returned to its previous state, calm, but full of menace. The lights are off. The space was completely dark. And in the darkness, I heard a voice breath, not mine. Not someone's. But a breath like from so many lungs at once. Rhythmic. Creepy. Intense. I gritted my teeth and turned the flashlight back on. It disappeared. Only emptiness remains. I rushed to the control panel near the door and tried to unlock the emergency lock. My hands were shaking. I was sweating. It took me nearly 3 minutes to break the system and get out of Bay 7. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I ran straight to the control room, closed all the doors, and locked them with both the key card and the mechanical key. The radio static started up again. Louder. Intensifier. Through the deafening white waves, I began to hear more than just my name, snippets of conversation. Distorted, broken. But clear. A human voice. About route changes. About detours. Road closures due to geology, war, something, never reported in the press. The voice didn't sound like a modern person. It had a timbre that was worn down by time. A kind of ancient disappointment, drawn out and dry. As the new highway rejoined the original asphalt, where two worlds temporarily merged, I sensed something strange. The weight is slowly lifted. Light, slow, as if that thing also felt the intersection. All signs faded, the temperature returned to normal. The radio went silent. The thermal display showed nothing but my own car. But there were new marks on the roof. Same 5. But deeper. Clearer. As if it knew exactly where to stick. I pulled into a 24-hour rest stop and played back the footage. The camera had caught it all. Cold streaks, moving shapes, clear structures. But to the naked eye, there was nothing. Nothing on the roof. No movement. No shadows. It was as if I was watching the shadow of an entity that had no shadow. I can't turn back. I can't ignore it either. In the weeks that followed, I dove into research like an addict. I started mapping. I searched every gap between the modern route and the old roads that had been erased from official maps. The trip to St. Louis had started out as a stopover between 2 concerts. But now it had become a systematic exploration, a quest to find buried geographical memory. And that thing got stronger and stronger. With each encounter, the compass turned slower, as if patiently. The radio static became less chaotic, as if sifting through information. The fragments of conversation became clearer, even if distorted. Route 7 was closed in 1954. The southern loop has been filled in, we can't go back. Every time, the longer it stays. And each time, I feel it more clearly, it is using my car as a tool. An eye to see. A hand to feel through the fragments of a land it can no longer enter. New roads have cut it off from where it once lived. And now, it is groping, section by section, bridge by bridge, old curve, to find it again. Link. Then there was the time. I felt it even when the map showed no overlap between the old and new roads. No match. No trace of road history. But it was there. And that time, it didn't leave right away. If you're still here and still listening, I need you to understand one thing. This thing is not simply haunting. It is memory. It is exile. It is an entity that was once everywhere, now existing only in the cracks of earth and asphalt, creeping through the gaps that humans have forgotten. If one day you are driving on the highway, and the temperature suddenly drops, the radio is noisy, the steering wheel suddenly becomes light. Don't look up. Don't touch it. And absolutely do not turn back the old road. I kept my hands on the steering wheel, not daring to breathe heavily. The rain suddenly came, pouring down the windshield like a curtain of water, making the street lights blur and tremble. The man was still sitting in the back seat, his tall and thin figure seemed to sink even deeper into the darkness. The rearview mirror began to fog up with moisture, but I could still see his eyes reflecting a faint red light, not the eyes of an ordinary person. "Where do you want to go next?" I asked without turning around. The question floated in the quiet space. There was no answer, only the sound of the wipers and the sound of my heart pounding like thunder in my chest. Then, his voice rang out, dry like the clash of stone and metal. "To the last place, where the last car stopped that rainy night." I swallowed. "What do you mean?" "You're driving the same route. On this exact day, at this exact time. Only this time. I'm behind the wheel, not in front of it." My heart clenched. A chill ran down my spine. I looked at my watch, 11:47 p.m. The GPS map suddenly blinked and turned, even though I hadn't touched it. A small road appeared on the screen, nameless, just a gray line winding through an abandoned industrial area on the east side of the city. I turned on my high beams and turned down the road. All the sounds outside seemed to disappear, no more rain, no more cars. The world seemed to be sucked into a vacuum, just me, him, and the car. A bend appeared. I braked hard. Before me was a graffiti-covered wall and yellow warning rope. The GPS still pointed straight, but in reality it was a dead end. I turned to ask him, "Are you sure this is the place?" He leaned back and tapped the fogged glass with his fingertips 3 times. Each sound echoed like a coffin lid being slammed shut. Then he said, "Don't you remember? We died here." My throat tightened. I wanted to scream, to open the door and run, but my body didn't respond. In the rearview mirror, the back seat empty. No one was sitting there. But the deep handprint on the frosted glass was still there, cold and shivering as if it had just been placed there. I turned around. No one. Then, my phone vibrated. A text message with no sender. "Thanks for taking me home again. Last ride. Goodbye, driver number 227. I dropped my phone on the floor of the car. As I bent down to pick it up, a bright light came from outside. I looked up, and found myself standing in the middle of the road, saw the car he was driving coming. No time to avoid. I woke up, sat behind the wheel, sweat pouring down like rain. The clock displayed 11:12 p.m. The screen shows that there is a customer booking a car, pickup location, corner of Vermont and 96th, the person who placed the order, no name. I take the ride. Again. The rain started to pour down harder, as if the sky wanted to cover up any trace of what had happened in that car. I tried to stay calm, tried to tell myself that it was just a tired illusion, but the soft laughter still echoed somewhere in my head, echoing as if from the back seat, where he had been sitting, where no one should be sitting at this hour. I turned off the app. The car was empty. But in the rearview mirror, the back seat had a slight dent as if someone had just sat down. I shivered, eyes never leaving the mirror, then mustered up the courage to turn around. It was empty. Just blackness mixed with the streetlights flickering through the glass. I laughed hoarsely, my voice hoarse and dry, and backed off the empty road, trying to find the light. But everything around me seemed to change. The streetlights dimmed, one by one, as if I were driving deeper into the palm of something invisible, breathing softly and watching my every move. Hello everyone. I'm a storyteller. And if you're listening to this in the middle of the night, you're probably looking for something just enough to lull you to sleep, or just enough to wake up that old fear in your heart. Before we begin, slow down your breathing. Like and subscribe, if you want me to keep going. By the way, where are you from? And what time are you watching? Your watch is probably off by a few seconds since this story began. My truck had been running for 3 days straight. The engine was still running, but the sound it made wasn't like a machine. It was like the groan of something trapped underground for so long that it could only echo through the metal chimneys. I had been driving cross-country for nearly 2 weeks, from the snowy roads of the north to the arid plains of Colorado. In the back seat, guitar cases and amplifiers rattled to the rhythm of the car. Everything was normal, until I passed through the suburbs of Lyman. I was just reaching for my coffee. And then, there was the sound of something scraping on the roof of the car. Not the branches. Not the birds. Not the wind. It was a slow, heavy scratching. Like fingernails sliding across wet concrete. A deliberate movement. Specific. Intimate. The bus shook, but not from the wind. It was as if something had climbed up, settled on the roof, pressing down on my memories. When I reached the next stop, I climbed up to look. There were 5 black streaks on the roof. Parallel. Each the size of a finger. Running from front to back. All gridded. Their color was, like soot, but deeper, as if something had left not only a mark but also absorbed the light. The gas station attendant glanced and frowned. Drivers occasionally see these marks along this road, he said, but usually they blame it on construction vehicles dropping asphalt. I said nothing. Because asphalt doesn't leave fingernail marks. And I didn't whisper my name over the AM radio. Holloway, the voice whispered. Over and over. Between static channels, like breathing in a vent. Things got weirder in Kansas. The compass on the dashboard, which should have been steady, started spinning. Not randomly. But in deliberate arcs. Slowly. As if someone was twisting it with their fingers in a way that didn't follow the Earth's magnetic field. I noticed, every time the needle turned, the radio went static. Every time the radio went static, I heard a whisper. And every time, it coincided with modern roads crossing old roads, clearly visible on the satellite map. Roads that were forgotten. Buried. But never gone. I started taking notes. GPS milestones. Locations of the phenomenon. Each location felt different. The air was heavier. Thicker. Silence so deafening that it hurt my eardrums. And strangest of all, the metallic taste in my mouth every time I breathed. 3 nights later, in Missouri, I started to get really scared. This morning, when I checked the car, I noticed that all the bolts on the roof were loose. I was sure I had tightened them the night before with a wrench. But now they came off by hand. Not broken. Not worn. Just loose. I repeat the tightening every night. But every morning it's the same. I stopped pretending nothing was happening. I bought an infrared camera. I mounted it on the roof of my car, facing it up. And I started driving around 3 a.m., when the traffic was lightest. It was also when the darkness was deepest. I chose roads that had been abandoned, where modern maps avoided them, like a secret that was too good to be told. The first night, I felt it. Not through sound. Not through sight. But through pressure. That feeling of standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing you're going to jump, but not sure if you've got your parachute. The camera picked up a clip. Not clear. But enough for me to see something, touching the fiberglass. A blur. Sliding. Not walking. Not crawling. Just moving as if no physical contact was needed. The skid marks came after that, exactly 5. Just like the first one. I began to understand that what was following me didn't need a door. Didn't need a hood. Didn't need to know who I was. Because it has knew my name before. Are you still listening? If so, remember, if one night, you are driving and hear the sound of sliding on the roof. Don't stop. Don't look up. And absolutely, don't turn back. If you want to hear the next part, leave a comment. If not, good night. If you dare to sleep. Historical maps show that the old highway once hugged the terrain, skirting every rock face, every stream bank, every shallow mountain pass, as if it had been mapped by the land's own memory. The modern interstate, meanwhile, plows straight through, flat and steady, ideal for heavy trucks, but indifferent to the invisible sediments that lie beneath. At 3:17 a.m., I reached the top of an artificial hill built to maintain the highway's elevation. As I crossed the crest, the temperature inside the car dropped 15 degrees Celsius in less than 30 seconds. The air felt tight, as if compressed by something invisible. My breath was visible, and a thin layer of fog began to form on the inside of the windows, on a still warm November night. I glanced at the infrared monitor. It still registered my heat signature, my body glow like a smoldering red dot in the cold metal furnace. But, above me, on the roof of the car, 5 elongated shapes. Not exactly cold, but no trace of living heat either. They, lack of warmth. Simply, emptiness. A kind of thermal silence. A denial of the existence of life. The weight fell slowly, bit by bit. Not like an object falling, but like someone trying, check. Tap. Press. Lean. Feel. Consider. The suspension compressed. The steering in my hands suddenly felt uncannily precise, as if the car had just had a steering upgrade. But no, physics doesn't work that way. Adding weight should make it heavier, more sluggish, less agile. Not, more refined. I gripped the wheel, trying to maintain 55 miles per hour. My heart pounded in my temples. The shapes on the thermal imager began to change. They didn't stay still. They adjusted. They shifted. They redistributed their weight. One shape stretched forward, as if reaching for something, and then pulled back, as if it had missed its chance.